Hello, this is day 3 of Balancing Act. Balancing Act is our lab where we're talking about the nitrogen cycle. So make sure when you are getting ready to go through these notes that you have your Balancing Act notes packet nearby. You should have a pencil or other writing utensil, and if you're in the classroom with us, you want to have a dry erase marker as well. All right, so these are your 4 warm-up questions. You can read them. I'll read them out loud. What are the 4 forms of nitrogen in the nitrogen cycle? Is the nitrogen in the atmosphere usable by both plants and animals? What are 2 ways that nitrogen is fixed? And a molecule of nitrite contains how many atoms of each element? So think about those. You can pause if you want to write down your answers in your notes. And I'm going to click on forward, and we're actually going to kind of do some classroom updates, and then we'll go over these answers. All right. So testing, no, you already took a test. It's not that we have one coming up. So I just wanted to remind you to look at your score in SIS. If you scored below 80%, it just means that you're eligible for a retake. And if you want to retake your test, you can email me to set that up. If you need help figuring out what your percent is, because it's not listed as a percent in SIS, just let me know. All right, so our warm-up questions. What are the 4 forms of nitrogen in the nitrogen cycle? Remember, when we're talking about forms, we are talking about kind of the chemical formula. What is it going to look like when it is in that particular arrangement? So our first form is nitrogen gas, N2, nitrogen gas in the atmosphere. Okay, then we're sort of lumping ammonia and ammonium together, NH3 and NH4 plus. That's going to be a different form. So we have our nitrogen gas, and then we have ammonia or ammonium. We have nitrites, which are not particularly helpful for us. Nitrites, that second I is for icky. And then the other form that we look at is nitrate, NO3. Okay, so these are the 4 basic forms that we think about that we are finding our nitrogen. Is the atmospheric nitrogen usable by both plants and animals? The answer is no, we can't use that nitrogen until it is fixed or changed. Remember, that means that we have to break apart those 2 nitrogen atoms, and they are held together super strongly by a triple bond. So we cannot use nitrogen directly from the atmosphere, and plants can't either. All right, so here's our nitrogen cycle, and we can fix that nitrogen using our nitrogen fixing bacteria, and then more bacteria is going to continue that process and ultimately give us nitrates, or lightning can fix the nitrogen as well. Okay, remember, when we are fixing nitrogen, when we are changing it, it's a chemical reaction. So we have some reactants that go in, and we have a lot of energy that can make that change happen, and it will yield some different products, different arrangements of the atoms that went in. All right, it happens in the air if it's lightning. Over here, I lost my mouse. And it happens from bacteria, mostly in the soil, that's being demonstrated over here. All right, so 1 molecule of NO2, which is nitrite, contains how many atoms of each element? Well, in order to answer this, we have to realize that we have 2 elements. One of them is N for nitrogen, and one is O for oxygen. So those are our 2 elements. Looking at this, we have just N. There's 1 single N here. We have O with the number 2 in the subscript position. That's telling us that we have 2 O's. So we have 1 nitrogen atom, and we have 2 oxygen atoms. 1 nitrogen atom, 1, 2. We have 2 oxygen atoms right there. Check out my fancy new thing that I just figured out. 1 nitrogen atom, and then we have, I'm going to click it and it's going to say 2, but we have 2 oxygen atoms. I think that's fun. All right. So we did a kind of brain warm up during class today. You can pause this. I'm not going to spend very much time on it, but we asked people to unscramble this word. And I gave everybody a hint that it starts with the D. It was decomposer, and decomposers are super important because they break down dead plants and animals. And of course, when they break down those dead plants and animals, there are components to that matter that get released into the soil. You already know that decomposers break down dead plants and animals and release carbon into the soil and carbon into the atmosphere. But we're thinking about a new form of matter. We're thinking about nitrogen in this lab. So these decomposers also, when they break down the matter, they break down and release nitrogen into the soil. All right, here's a second word to unscramble. You can pause if you want. The first letter is P. The other hint I gave the class is you will see a picture of a tick. That usually did it. So people said it is parasitism because this tick is a parasite. All right, and our last word, take a moment, starts with a C. The word is combustion, and we talked about combustion when we talked about burning fossil fuels, but we also talked about combustion when we looked at forest fires. So remember, that's just a big fancy word for meaning burn, so combust or burn things, and we will talk about forest fires and some things later on too. All right, our learning targets. So if Uncle Joe comes for dinner, you want to explain, hey, Uncle Joe, in science, I am going to review my knowledge about the nitrogen cycle. I'm also going to learn about the parts of an experiment. So we will do some of that today, and we will continue with that next class. How are we going to do it? Through collaboration practice. And so you'll hear me talking a little bit while we're in the classroom, and then you'll be wandering around exploring and learning some more things and practicing. And why are we doing this? So that we can understand how another form of matter, nitrogen in this case, travels through the ecosystem, and how we can get the nitrogen we need, because all living things need nitrogen. All right, so before I turn you too loose, I just wanted to make sure to talk about groundwater one more time. So groundwater is different from surface water. Surface water is going to be rivers and streams and ponds and lakes and things that you can see right as you're standing on land or if you're on a boat. Groundwater is water that is absorbed and stored in the ground in aquifers and things. And so it is, you can see it's below the soil. It's different from surface water. Groundwater can become contaminated. And so if there's a landfill and we have rain going over the trash and debris from the landfill, chemicals and other pollutants can be leached off of the trash. And they can get into the soil and then down into this aquifer or this clean water. Other things that can happen if people are using pesticides or fertilizer, when that is, oopsie daisy, sorry. When that is touched by rain or precipitation, that also can get caught up in the runoff and it can filter down through the soil into the aquifer. And this is important because there are some people who live in areas where they need to use a well and they drill down so that they can get fresh water to use to drink and prepare food or to shower and wash clothes and things like that. And so well water, if you live in an area where you need well water is often tested for accidental contamination. All right. Groundwater, again, is that water that is below the ground, and you have to access it by digging in to the ground usually. Okay, so think about what we did last class. Last class, you pretended to be a nitrogen atom, and you bounced around and went to different locations. So this was actually virtual this time. It was similar to our carbon atom where you physically moved around the classroom. This one we did online, and you took notes with your nitrogen journey. Okay, so we found that nitrogen can be in the atmosphere, it can be in water, it can be in live plants and live animals, it can be in dead plants and dead animals, it can be in the atmosphere, it can be in the soil, And so if you turn to pages 8 and 9, 8 actually starts with number 1 here instead of number 5. And 9 then starts with number 5. We are going to make sure that you fill in all of these boxes. So please be ready to fill in all of these boxes. You're going to fill in the boxes, and you're also going to write what happened along your arrow. Okay, so let's walk through this a little bit. And if I'm thinking about atmosphere, which is in number 1, atmosphere has 2 places that the nitrogen can go to from the atmosphere. There are 2 boxes here. So what I asked students to do in the classroom is look at your journey, your travel log for your nitrogen, and see if you found 2 places in your log that you went to. You might not have. So if you didn't have 2 different places that you went to, you could ask somebody else in the classroom. Also, this slide deck, I'm going to go ahead and show you all the places that you could end up. So we all started in the atmosphere, and then we could have traveled places from the atmosphere. We could have traveled to the soil, and we got into the soil by being fixed. You might have been fixed by lightning, or you might have been fixed by bacteria. Also, if you started out in the atmosphere, you could end up in surface water, and you might have been runoff. So you were nitrogen in the atmosphere, and you were caught up in water or stormwater runoff or something, and then you became surface water. You might have gotten there by being part of the rain, caught up in the rain. So I'm going to have you spend in the classroom 5 minutes asking each other to help you fill in all of these boxes and fill out all of those arrows to show how you got from one place to another. But I'm not going to spend 5 minutes on the video here. You can pause this if you want to take some time. All right, so here are your answers that you were looking for. Realize that if you wrote soil in this box instead of surface water, that's fine. It doesn't matter where it is as long as it is in the correct area, like atmosphere. Okay, so number 1, atmosphere could be fixed and end up in the soil. This is nitrogen in the atmosphere, could be fixed and end up in the soil, or nitrogen from the atmosphere could end up in rainwater and get into the surface water. Number 2, once you're in the soil as nitrogen, there are 4 things that could happen to you. You could be filtered down into the ground, into that groundwater, into that deep aquifer, that deep water area. Or you might have gotten caught up in runoff, and then you became part of the surface water. If you were nitrogen in the soil, maybe the live plants actually used the nitrogen in the soil. It was in the form of nitrates, probably. And so you ended up now as nitrogen in live plants. Or you could be denitrified. Denitrifying bacteria might send you right back to the atmosphere. Okay, you can always pause the video if you need to make sure that you have time to write down these answers. In number 3 here, if you started out as nitrogen in a live plant, you might have died, which would put you in dead plants and animals, or you might have been eaten, which would put you in live animals. Okay, so now our nitrogen is in one of those 2 places. We are moving to box 4. This nitrogen ended up in live animals, and so live animals can die, right? And if they die, the nitrogen that was in the live animals is now in dead plants and animals. Or live animals poop. Everyone poops. So live animals poop, and nitrogen can end up in animal waste. You can pause the video if you need to. I'm going to click on though. If you ended up in animal waste as nitrogen, you have some things that can happen. Maybe it was a little bunny that pooped out in a field, and that soil, that poop just kind of decomposed and became part of the soil. Or maybe it was some animal waste that ended up on an impermeable surface, so it couldn't go into the ground, but runoff might have started to dissolve it, and so some of that nitrogen ends up in the surface water. In box 6 over here, if your nitrogen ended up in dead plants or animals, it could decompose into the soil, so that now there's nitrogen in the soil. Or if it was a poor, unfortunate squirrel that got hit by a car or something, and it was kind of run over and then rained upon. I know that's super unpleasant, but if we have something that's decomposing on an impermeable surface, the nitrogen actually can end up in the surface water. Okay, We can also have nitrogen end up back in the atmosphere because of energy from a forest fire. If we have nitrogen in surface water, that nitrogen could be absorbed into live plants through the roots. That nitrogen could be transformed into a gas, into the atmosphere. This would be normally transformed by denitrifying bacteria. Or if your nitrogen is in the surface water, it could actually filter down and become part of the groundwater, that deep aquifer. Finally, if your nitrogen was in the groundwater, there is actually groundwater that flows, so it's kind of a completely enclosed underground stream or river. So that water, if it's groundwater and deep, that is flowing water that could come up to the surface, and your nitrogen could now be surface water. Or your nitrogen that started out in groundwater could be absorbed in through the roots and become part of live plants. Or your nitrogen in the groundwater might bubble up into the soil and get dissolved into that soil. So we have several different directions that our nitrogen can go, and you can see it's moving through that whole ecosystem in biotic and abiotic things. All right. This next slide is another kind of shows all of the things that we just talked about. So if you want to, you can pause and double check your notes. All right. So once you've checked your notes and you make sure you feel pretty good about them, you are going to do a review session. Now, we did this in the classroom, so you would probably have to come and ask me about this. I gave everybody 10 minutes to walk around with your notes packet and see if you could answer 12 different scenario questions. So it was quick moving, but your packet pretty much has all of the information, or some of the answers came from the warm-up on this set of notes. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and click through all of our post-exploration review and go through each one of these questions. But when you were in the classroom, you wrote answers to each one of the stations on a piece of paper and then turned that in. All right. Question 1 said, when nitrogen is in the atmosphere, what form does it take? So the form is, what does that molecule look like? It is N2, right? Nitrogen gas. Then station 2, it says, where can nitrogen go from the atmosphere? Well, if it's in the atmosphere, you're going to look in your packet because you're going to see that there are 2 places it can go. It can go into the soil through bacteria, right? Or it actually can end up in surface water as well. That was from your packet. When nitrogen is in the soil, what are the 3 forms that it can be? Remember the forms, that's going to be about the chemical formula or the chemical notation. The 3 forms we're going to talk about are ammonia and ammonium. We count that together. Nitrites, that's NO2. Nitrates, that's NO3. Those are the 3 forms in the soil where we're going to find our nitrogen. Nitrites, nitrates, and ammonia. This is actually NH4 is ammonium, NH3 is ammonia. Once nitrogen is in the soil, where can it go next? Well, we can look at this little picture diagram and check and see. And if you're looking in your notes, you're in the soil, you can become groundwater, you can become surface water, you can become, and you're really becoming part of the surface water or the groundwater, part of a live plant, or part of the atmosphere. Okay. Which form of nitrogen can plants absorb? Remember, if it's got an A, it's A-OK. That is the one we want to absorb. That is nitrates. A-OK right there. Where can nitrogen move from live plants? Well, if you're a live plant, you can basically die or you can be eaten. Those are your options. So you can go to dead plants and animals, or you can go to live animals. Okay, where can nitrogen go from live animals? Live animals can die, or they can poop. And when they poop, their nitrogen goes into the soil or the water areas that way. Okay, which step is this? So in this case, you want to remember that we have 5 basic steps of our whole nitrogen cycle. So these are the 5 main steps in the nitrogen cycle. The steps are nitrogen fixation, ammonification, that means we're turning things into ammonia or ammonium. Nitrification, we're turning things into NO2 or NO3 or something like that. Assimilation means we are using the nitrates, we are using the nitrogen in some way. And finally, denitrification means we are putting just nitrogens together. We're taking everything else off and letting it go back into the atmosphere. So if we're talking about steps, we're talking about one of those 5 things. When we're talking about forms, we are talking about whether it is a gas or whether it is NO2 or NO3 or something. Okay, so this is a step. What step is this? It says plants cannot use the atmospheric nitrogen, so it must be fixed or transformed first. It needs to be fixed. That's your clue that it's nitrogen fixation, which can happen by bacteria or by lightning. Interestingly, the legume root nodules, so plants that are in the pea family, have these bubbly root nodules that actually have bacteria that can fix nitrogen. Okay, nitrogen fixation can occur in lentils and peas, broad beans and chickpeas, soybeans, other beans like lima beans, and peanuts. Peanuts are actually legumes. So this specific type of plant has these nodules with bacteria that can fix the nitrogen. All right, again, we're thinking which step is this? So one of those 5 steps. Let's read it. Decomposers like bacteria and fungi transform nitrogen-containing parts of the organic matter, so that means dead organisms and waste, transforms that stuff into ammonia. We are turning something into ammonia. If we're turning it into ammonia, remember that's going to be ammonification. Okay? If we're turning things into some sort of a nitrogen-based molecule, we're probably going to have nitrification. But that was ammonification. All right, so which step is this? One of our 5 steps again. Bacteria transforms ammonium, this is technically ammonium, into nitrates, which the plants can then absorb. Okay, so we are transforming into some sort of nitrogen situation that we are happy about and can use. That is nitrification. Some bacteria convert nitrates, NO3, in the soil, into nitrogen gas, which is released back into the atmosphere. So this is part of our cycle. So remember, we're getting those nitrogens all alone. We're removing nitrogen from the other molecules. We are denitrifying because we're pulling those nitrogens off. So this is denitrification that turns our nitrogen back into nitrogen gas that is in the atmosphere. Which step is this? We want one of those 5 steps. And so we're looking at, this is the process by which the plants absorb the ammonium or nitrates through their roots so that they can make proteins. So this means that the plants are using the nitrates, right? That's the word assimilation. All right, some classes got to this, most did not. So if you did get a chance to do this set of notes on your packet, I had just asked people to do these notes and check their work with somebody else. So I'm going to click on through. I don't even have the key for you, but you're checking around with other people. Okay, and then with 1 or 2 of the classes, we did a Kahoot. If your class didn't do the Kahoot yet, we will do the Kahoot to review the nitrogen cycle. All right, we did start this next section, but I think I'm going to do this as a separate video because my video is getting super long. So thanks for watching part 1. If you come back here to part 2, I'm going to talk about experimental design, and it'll be a much shorter video. Thanks for watching.